Hey guys, welcome to She Knows Arsenal. My name is Jessica and I'm your host, and you can follow me on Twitter at It's Jessinho. On today's show, we're going to be doing an injury report with Dr. Raj. He's going to be here in a little bit, but before we do the injury report for David Luiz and Kieran Tierney, we're going to just talk a little bit about the game against Slavia Prague. I talked to the Euro expert yesterday, and I don't think this game is going to be as straightforward as we think, and we'll also go over a little bit of the press conference that Arteta did. So if you're watching right now, let me know you're in the comment section in the chat box. Tell me where you're listening in from or watching in from. And so essentially when I watched the press conference, the majority of the conversation was based around, what are our chances of qualifying for Europe, all of the injuries, and the idea that, I don't know, I feel like there's this idea going around, or like this narrative going around, that Arteta has lost the dressing room or something. But, Arteta spoke about how everything is still in play. We're still in a position to be able to, qualify for Europe through the league as well as Europa League, which is true. But I think we all kind of know that it's Europa League or bust at this moment. He spoke about the injuries. I mean, it's very inconclusive who's actually going to be available for this game. We know for sure Tierney and David Luiz will not be available, but Saka, Emile Smith-Rowe, and Odegaard are also, we're not quite sure if they're going to make it or not for the game. And they're all being assessed ahead of tomorrow's game. So that's really worrying to me. I do feel like because they're in training, there's a chance that they'll play, but just our inability to have a consistent 11 over a span of time, I think for me is what's causing so much of the inconsistencies with our performances. Right after Boxing Day, when we continuously played the same front four of, Emile Smith-Rowe, Saka, Lacazette, even Pepe to a certain extent. Martinelli was in there a little bit too. At least having three of those pieces be exactly the same over that 4 or 5 game period, I think we just had good consistency, good chemistry. And Odegaard came in. We tried to fit Aubameyang back in. Things got muddy. And then now we're not quite sure what team can play, because now 2 of our other bigger pieces are missing, in David Luiz and Tierney. So I really couldn't tell you who I thought was going to play in this game, but we can talk about that a little bit. But I'm trying to figure out where this narrative is coming in about Arteta has lost the dressing room. I think that's what's most distressing for me at this point, is that after losing to Liverpool, I mean, if you had told me before the game, or at the beginning of the season, that we would have lost to Liverpool 3-0, I would have said, oh, that sounds like something that would happen, because, I mean, they're the defending champions. Whether they're actually defending it or not is irrelevant. They're still a really good team, and we're a little bit off the pace in regards to like where we are in the scope of our projects and things like that. So they're pretty much the finished article, and we're still trying to make things happen, so I just don't understand where this whole, the club, Arsenal, is engulfed in flames at this moment. The senior players, or there's a group of players that are not buying into the project. They're not playing for Arteta, this and that. And I'm just like, where's this coming from? Just 2 weeks ago, we beat, Spurs, and then we tied West Ham, a team who the entire Premier League is thinking is this great and wonderful team. We tied them, and then we lose to Liverpool, and the club is falling apart. Nobody's playing for the manager. I just find that to be so, as Yo-Yo's already said, a media-created madness, where I think things were going too smooth. We looked like we were making strides and we were getting better, and the media was waiting for a moment of weakness to continue this crazy narrative. The team is playing for Arteta. They've said before that they're just not doing what they've been told. This team is really imbalanced. the chemistry is just not there with key players missing, and just the fragile mentality of this team. The inconsistencies in results is not that hard to predict. No consistency in results. It just is what it is. But this madness about Arteta's lost the dressing room and there's a mutiny being started and all this kind of stuff is just so far-fetched and stupid. So I don't really get that. But yeah. And I know that, if you guys follow me on Twitter, I've said that I just don't think that we're there, and we're mid-table because we perform at that level. We may have players that can play in top 4 sides or are world-class players, or the best young players, whatever. But ultimately your performances are what dictate who you are as a team. And right now our performances are saying that we're mid-table. So mid-table teams do mid-table things. Mid-table teams do mid-table things. They can beat anybody or lose to anybody on any given day. So losing to Liverpool is not the end of the day. I think the performance is what was more jarring, but we've seen this before where the team just capitulated. So, I don't think it's so beyond us, but Andrew Moon says he can't wait for Dr. Brar. He's such an asset to have for this Arsenal fan base. Yes, he'll be here in about 20 minutes or so, so yeah, he'll be here to talk to us about David Luiz and Tierney. So another thing that, I put out on Twitter that I just kind of wanted to talk about on the stream before Dr. Raj comes is the idea that backup has to be significantly like nobody would want to be a backup if good players won't accept being backups. I kind of spoken about Kieran Tierney and how I'm thinking I love him. He's my favorite player on the team. I want him to be Arsenal captain. I want him to reach great heights for this club. But I've been really trying to hold this narrative for a long time about him being injury prone. But I think based on this season, he is injury prone. I think, I just was trying not to believe it. I didn't want it to be true. So, it's devastating, but he's injury prone. He has injury proneness. I hate to use labels like that, but he doesn't seem to be able to get through a full season, and he's out quite a bit. So my idea was that if we can anticipate that Tierney is going to be out from injury or whatever for a large parts of the season, would you want to trust a 30-something-year-old player that's not anything like this, like Tierney, to play maybe 50% of the games in the season? Could we do better than that, to make sure that the quality and consistency stays about the same when Tierney is here or not? Because I think at this point, and we'll talk to Dr. Raj about it, but I think if we can anticipate the fact that Tierney is going to be out for a certain amount of time, we love him, and when we have him, we want him to be at 100%, then I think it would be a good idea for us to maybe veer away from the low-hanging fruit of an older free signing that can do a job and maybe go for a younger, more, competitive option. Because not only do I think that we need a left back similar to Kieran Tierney, I think every single player in this team needs to feel like their job is up for grabs. And I think the lack of competitiveness in our positions is another reason why we are not as competitive as we could be. So Andrew Moon says, problem we have for next season, no Europe means no rotational minutes for reserve players plus youngsters. This is very true. But I also think that, you have to take into consideration that we have the African Cup of Nations. We have, I think, the World Cup as well is wedged somewhere in there. And the Euros is going to make it where I think there's going to be more fatigue, less time to rest, and more rotation that needs to be had because we're going to have so many stops and starts through the league season. And some of our players would be gone. Some of our players would be playing for their national teams and things like that. So even though we may not have European competition, which I agree, will limit some of the additional minutes that we can have for reserve players and youngsters, I still think there is a case to be made for having quality versus just people that we don't feel comfortable with. I mean, that's just kind of how I feel about it, and it gave me this idea of maybe doing some sort of scouting video or something on left back options that we can bring in for Kieran Tierney that would not only be competitive, but be cost effective and fit the requirements of the project and not end up with another Cedric. I cannot stress how, like, just a couple months ago, how people were so upset about Cedric and the deal for Cedric. He's a little bit he's not super old, I mean, obviously he's like 28, 29 years old, but we hooked him with a 4-year deal, and he's barely played, so for me, it's like, why would we do that again? I mean, have we not learned anything from Willian, bringing in a free signing that seems like a sure thing? Players of that age that are out of contract are going to not only want stupid wages, but they're going to want long contracts that we're going to be tied to for a significant amount of time. That's going to stop our progression and our ability to build a squad of a certain level. So for me, it's, can we go in a different direction? I use the example of when Ricardo Pereira was out for a long period of time for Leicester, they didn't go and get Ryan Bertrand. They went and got Castagna, and so now they have 3 really good options in fullback positions. Obviously, James Justin is now injured, but having James Justin, Castagna, and Ricardo Pereira, I think all of them can play on both sides. It was really good for them. And I think that Leicester has been a really good benchmark for how to recruit and how to make sure you don't have gaps in your squad. Obviously, because they don't have the money that City has, they still have gaps in their squad because of injuries and things like that. But ultimately, when it comes to squad rotation, they usually have decent options as backups, especially in the fullback area. Somebody said, well, now Pereira's playing in the midfield because they have to find a place for him to fit. Not necessarily. He's the type of player that can play in multiple positions, and they are missing players in the midfield like Madison. So I think if you want to create a more competitive environment, you want to make sure you're not stuck with players on the wrong side of 30 on big contracts. You need to be smarter when recruiting backup players and not just go for low-hanging fruit of your Van Arnholts and your Bertrands, because their levels are going to drop. Like, they are nothing like Kieran Tierney. Kieran Tierney runs the left-hand side. You automatically have to play more conservative when you have a player that can't do the things that he can do. So I don't know. That's just how I think about it. I know others feel like it's not necessary, or we don't have the funds, to recruit a top player as a left back cover. But there are a spectrum of players between top and retirement home that we could look at and make smarter choices than just, like I said, the low-hanging fruit of the Bertrands and the Van Arnholts. Das Kuma says, what do you think the club will do with Callum Chambers after the season? I don't really know, to be honest. I think that it really depends on what the funds look like. I don't really know. I mean, for me, I would think that if we're smart, we'll try to move him on. We have Cedric, and then we should be trying to replace Bellerin with a good right back. And that also kind of ties back into the conversation about the left back. I know that the funds may be tight, but I see Arsenal fans saying that we should get Hakimi. Hakimi is going to cost 50 million. So would it be smarter to get somebody maybe like Emerson, from Real Betis? Well, he's loaned to Real Betis from Barcelona, but wouldn't it be better to get somebody like that who fits the profile as well, that maybe we could get for 20 and use the rest of whatever money we would be spending on Hakimi for a better backup at left back? I just think we need to spread the money out. I know that it's like, well, you want more quality than quantity, but I think spending 50 million on Hakimi seems more silly to me than spending more money on a left back cover when they're going to be playing 50% of the season because Tierney can't stay fit. and most of our attacking and chance creation comes off of the left. So you think you'd want to protect that. Andrew Moon says, Dev, the obvious player is Omar Richards from Reading. Bayern are interested in him for their backup left back role. I'll look at this player. I think that there are options, and I will do some sort of scouting report or something on it where I pick like maybe 5 players and talk more in depth about, the pitfalls of going for the low-hanging fruit in free players that can do a job, excuse me, versus actually recruiting young players that will be okay with being backup. That's the thing. It's like, I think we've convinced ourselves that nobody wants to be a backup. But if you're a competitive team with a project that's attractive to young players, which I think ours would be, I don't understand why they wouldn't want to come to Arsenal and why having to fight for a position, a fight for minutes would be a big deal. There are teams that have young players, like Dortmund. A lot of young players go to Dortmund and they know that they're not going to play every single game, but they still go there for their development. So I don't really understand why Arsenal would be any different than that. Deb says someone from the academy. I know there's somebody named Joel Lopez in the academy, but I don't think he's ready. I'm not even sure if he's really, besides the times where most of our players were out on international duty, if he's been brought in to train with the first team. But that's also something that long-term, I think Arsenal need to think about, is being able to fill in squad positions with academy players so we keep our homegrown numbers up and we have opportunities to showcase young players that may or may not make it at Arsenal, and they can serve the first team from either playing squad positions or squad roles or being sold for profit, being sold for fees in the long term. Can't do that when you have Cedrics and Bertrands and Williams, in the team blocking paths for young players. So I really don't like the idea of getting an out of contract player on the wrong side of 30 at this point in the development of our project. Tony says Cedric has been fine as a backup. I don't think he is on big wages. Willian was bad signing, but Cedric has been fine. Sketchy how it came about, but he has been fine at right back. That's the thing. But we know that we knew he wasn't going to play that much. If Kieran Tierney had not been injured, Cedric wouldn't have played barely any minutes this season because Hector Bellerin has been playing the entire season because he's been more fit, but at this point, and we'll talk to Dr. Raj about this, to a certain extent, Kieran Tierney is going to be unreliable for a certain amount of games. And it's going to be more significant than the amount of games that maybe Bellerin can't play. He's injury prone. So what we're talking about is a player that we know is not going to, maybe will play about 50% of the games of the season. That's what we have to plan for. And we should want to play him less so he can stay healthy. So when he does play, he can play at 100%. So Cedric has not been a bad signing. But what I'm saying is that when you look at the left-hand side, which is where all of our chance creation is, where we score, how we build up, or how most of our goals are created, wouldn't you want a player similar to Tierney so that we don't have to change the entire way that we play in order to make it up when he's not playing? I don't think that that's going to change from this season to next. The fact that we build up through the left, unless Aubameyang stops playing, we're going to continue to build up through the left, and create chances off of the left, so that it's different than the right-hand side. Bellerin plays more games than Tierney. Tierney's out more. So the quality of the left back cover is going to have to be better because they'll be playing more games. Yo-Yo asked, was it a mistake to sign Tierney in the first place? That is a very, very good question. I think that in hindsight, we can look at it and say, if you look at his injury record at Celtic, the writing was probably on the wall that this is a player that's unreliable, for big parts of the season. But I think being able to get a player of Tierney's quality at 25 million at that point and where we were is a risk that I think we should have taken. The issue is that we have not protected our investment. And that's why I say if you buy a player like this, you have to make sure that you can let them play comfortably the way that they want to play. Meaning, we can't tell Tierney to play at 80%. Tierney plays at 100% every single game. So if you want him to be able, when he's out there, to be able to play like that without fearing injury, then we need suitable backup so that we don't feel like we have to play him more. Does that kind of make sense? You know, if I think from this point forward, we need to figure out a way to protect him. But I think it's only a mistake if you don't protect the investment, you know, and we haven't done that. We've ran him into the ground. You know, Scotland ran him into the ground in the international break. And in my preview, I said that I was very worried about Tierney because of the amount of minutes that were in his legs from international duty with Scotland. And I didn't think he should have played in the Liverpool game, because the Liverpool game to me was inconsequential to our season. You know, we with him or without him, we were, you know, if we lost it, we lost it, you know, so he could have sat that one out and he would be playing against Slavia Prague, you know, essentially, you know, so I think to a certain extent as well with some of these players, we have to think, are we willing to take the worst case scenario here? You know, and the worst case scenario has really come to fruition that he's now probably going to be out for the rest of the season. So was it worth us playing him against Liverpool, you know, after all those minutes again in international duty? I don't know. Renee Black says the drop off in quality for the second option can't be too great. I mean, that's essentially the idea here, is that I think there's a significant, you know, drop in quality from Kieran Tierney to Ryan Bertrand / Patrick Van Aanholt. I think it's the easy way out because they're free, out of contract players, and they can do a job. But doing a job on the left-hand side is not good enough when everything that you do is based around that side of the field. You know, the quality needs to be better. I think it's a cop-out. You know, I do understand the argument about funds, but every top player or a quality backup or a quality left back doesn't always cost you 50 million. It can cost you 15, 20. And I would like to see the you know, us take that route instead of just, I mean, how much is it going to cost us in the long run having one of those types of older players on long contracts? That costs you money as well. Cosmo Bloom says, I read a few months ago that we had a director of football on the way. Has that happened? Still happening? Surely needs to happen before summer plans are pursued. Yeah, so that's Richard Garlick, I believe, and he works for the Premier League. He is not a director of football in the traditional sense of he's going to be consulted on signings. He's more going to be managing the contracts for signings. So Edu is still the technical director, meaning that he will have the majority of the say-so with Arteta in regards to the actual players, player profiles, who we bring in, recruitment. And then Richard Garlick will construct the contracts, I guess, to avoid, you know, the mistakes of the past of long contracts for players that shouldn't get long contracts. So it is happening. I think he has to finish up his year or the season at the Premier League, and then he'll be there for us for the summer. But if he does his job right, I think that's a good thing for us, because one thing that we've always criticized about the club is the contract situation and the fact that we don't do our due diligence. We don't protect ourselves. We don't get buyback clauses. We don't do sell-ons. We don't do anything that maximizes the contracts for us. You know, contracts are usually mostly for the player and they get everything they want and we don't get much in return. So if Richard Garlick can do a good job of keeping us away from giving 3-4 year deals to 35-year-olds, I'd be happy with that. Yo-Yo says we need a Tierney replacement, perhaps not an understudy. I mean, that's pretty much where I'm going with this. But it's hard to talk about Tierney in that way because he's a fan favorite and we love him and we have all these great and wonderful expectations of this player. But ultimately, who we want him to be and who he might end up being for Arsenal, maybe two completely different things based on the fact that he is unavailable for large parts of seasons. And historically, that has been true for Celtic and for us. He has been unable to really cement himself and be a consistent cog in our wheel per se, because he's always injured, so I think at the very least we need to bring in somebody that can share time with him, that's not looked at as a backup, that's only going to play the beginning of the Carabao Cup and maybe a game here and there, but somebody who, if Tierney is out, we're not shitting bricks because we know that everything is falling apart. It has to be somebody that we're comfortable with. And I think that that's a younger, smarter, sensible signing. And I just think that those players exist. I will find them and I will do a stream about it, because I don't believe that our only option is older players out of contract. I can't believe that that's the only thing, because I see other teams grabbing players from other, lower leagues and things like that. And they're good players. So I don't know why we can't do the same. But in regards to the replacement and not the understudy, I think next season, which will be I believe his third season with Arsenal, if he can't contribute enough, then I wouldn't be surprised if the club started kind of looking at different options. But I think at the very least, we need to bring in somebody comparable to him, Andrew Moon says, the problem is not that Cedric is fine. It's the opportunity cost of not getting someone younger who we can develop to either take over first team role or sell, like the James Justin deal. Yeah, I just think that we could be smarter, because I don't see other teams doing this. I think it's the easy way out. Cedric is fine, but should we settle for fine? What has fine gotten us? So I'm not saying spend 50 million on, another left back. What I'm saying is that let's explore other options that are available to us. Tierney has been consistently run into the ground by Celtic and Scotland. It was about time his body caught up to all the fatigue. And that's my thing. It's like, I think if we had the right people in place, we might have been able to manage him a little bit better. If we had brought him in and had suitable backup. I don't think Kolasinac is suitable backup, because we're always looking at it's like, okay, so this is how I imagine it goes, right? So they're sitting there and they're talking about what their options are. And let's say it's Kolasinac versus Tierney. Tierney's at 60, 70%. And you're thinking to yourself, should I play Tierney at 60 or 70% or play Kolasinac at 100%? What's better? And if you ask yourself that question, you'd probably say 60, 70% Tierney is better than Kolasinac. And that's the situation that we can't be in. If Tierney is at 60, 70%, then we need to have somebody available to us that we can say, Tierney, sit down and rest, because we have blank. He's at 100%, right? But the problem is that the options are just not good enough. They're just not good enough, so I don't know. But we'll do some more questions later, you guys. But Dr. Raj is here, so I'm going to go ahead and bring him in, because I know that that's who you guys are really interested in seeing. Hi, Dr.
Raj. Hey, what's up, Jess?
Nothing. How are you?
Not too bad. Not too bad.
Yeah. So thank you so much for being here. I really appreciate it. And everybody in the comments they're pretty much here for you only, so, they want to hear about, it's true. It's true. They're like, where's Raj? And I'm like, he's coming, but I feel like we only talk to each other when obviously there's some sort of injury crisis or something like that. So as much as I'm happy to see you, I'm sad that it's because we have to talk about Kieran Tierney and David Luiz. Let's start with David. We haven't really talked about him on the stream as of yet, but he's gotten this injury out of pretty much nowhere, and he's going to be out for a while. Can you give us just like a summary of what has happened to David Luiz, what kind of injury this is, and how long he could be expected to be out from your perspective?
Yeah, sure. So what it sounds like, just based on like the timeline that we heard, where they were debating whether to do surgery or not, it sounds like there was some irritation in his knee. Typically, it sounds like it's a meniscus issue, which is that tissue between the knee joint. And so they have to debate, does it make, sometimes those injuries will go away with conservative therapy, meaning physio. But then the debate becomes, okay, especially in a situation where you're on a time constraint, it's, do we let him try to just get through this? But what if it doesn't work and then you have surgery? Then he's possibly out for the rest of the season for sure, right? So it becomes that risk reward calculus. So it sounds like they went in and they probably trimmed that piece of the tissue that's annoyed. Typically, that return timeline is about 4 to 6 weeks. It can be less. Like Sergio Ramos had that procedure recently and was back in 3. And so it gives Luis a chance at least to be back, be fit possibly for the latter stages of Europa League, if, of course, if the club advanced that far. So that's what it sounds like with him.
Who would have thought that, if you had, anticipated this like last season, like if somebody had said, David Luiz would be out for a certain amount of time and you would be upset about it. If you would have told me that last season, I would have been like, are you serious? No. But he's literally become such an important piece of what we do. And I think we saw that against, we played against Liverpool, him and Holding are not similar, so how does this, you as just like take your doctor hat off for a second and just go into like your fan, hat. How does that make you feel in terms of like our chances of doing well at the latter ends of the season, knowing that we're going to be relying on Holding versus David Luiz, who's become so important for us?
Yeah, I think the hardest part, like we saw versus Liverpool, Luiz is the only consistent progressive passer in the back line, or the only comfortable progressive passer in the back line. Like we saw with Liverpool, they were perfectly fine cutting off a few channels of ball progression, and it pretty much shut the whole team down. Especially, of course, you're missing Xhaka, who's another critical one. And you're missing, of course, ESR and Saka on the edges. And so I think not having Luiz just limits your distribution options, right? It makes it a lot harder a lot easier for a defense to set up in that regard. Because you're not really, if Gabriel beats you with the ball, you tip your cap. If Holding beats you with the ball, you tip your cap to them, right? And so, but Luiz is actually dangerous. But I think you're going to see more of a concerted effort from Mikel to have these guys, or at least to have Xhaka and Partey drop a little deeper to give that easier outlet pass for them to link to that transition, right? And so, I think the other thing about Luiz, he's tried and tested in these big matches, and he typically shows up for big matches, and he's respected, as a leader on the pitch. And so that's also another void you have to fill moving forward, especially in these high pressure games.
Yeah, it's not only, like you said, it's not only the progressive passing and his defense, it's the leadership aspect of it. I think that was a big miss against Liverpool. That's another game where you have to have big personalities out there on the field. And as much as we, criticize Xhaka and David Luiz, they may have a clangor in them every once in a while, but they are the leaders on this team, so that is a very big concern. Do you think that this would be something that the club would look at and consider, this particular injury in, their decision making on whether they should give him an extension for next season? Is that something that you think that they would look at, or is something that you can just kind of like, okay, it was an injury, move on, that kind of thing?
I think it's an injury and you move on. It doesn't seem to be like a trim happens. He's also, let's say he stays another year. He's on the tail end of his career at Arsenal, a 1-year extension or whatever it is, right? It's not going to really, I think this injury does not affect him in that regard. And especially if he's able to have a summer of downtime, we'll see with that. But yeah, I don't think it really comes into play. The fact that they're trying to get him back this season tells you, one, of course, that they value him, but secondly, that it's not the most serious injury.
Yeah. So who's your center back pairing for the game against Slavia Prague? Do you risk it and do something crazy like 2 left-footed, or do you just go with Holding or maybe even Chambers?
Chambers is tough. I don't want to throw Chambers into a center back position that he hasn't played in a while in a high pressure game, right? Especially when he's never played with any of the other guys. Especially with let's slot in Gabriel on the left. He's not going to play there, and then you have Chambers who's never played with him, and then there's also for Chambers and Gabriel, there's a language barrier too. So it's not just they haven't played together. There's a bit of a language barrier, whereas Holding has played with him as well. And so, I mean, I think I'd have to go with Gabriel and Holding. I think the Liverpool game, you have to throw it out because you're missing 4 of your top players. Doesn't even matter, right? You throw it out. We know they pretty much Saka. I'm guessing if it was a must-win game, probably could have played. He had trained with the team. I'm guessing they let him play if they really need it, but they saved him for Europa. ESR, maybe not, but clearly, they saved these guys for Europa League. And so I would go with probably Gabriel and Holding. The question becomes, the big question is, and it's a good segue, who do you play at the side backs?
Yeah, I mean, that's pretty much, I think, what's on everybody's mind is, what are we going to do about the fullback situation? I do believe that Bellerin will come back in on the right. I think that's, but I did a poll, on Twitter to see how people were feeling about the left back situation.
Mm-hmm.
And most people said, well, the majority of people said that they would rather see Saka play left back and Cedric not play there on tomorrow. So how do you kind of feel just in general about moving around those pieces and maybe compromising the front, our attack, to get the left side ticking a little bit with Saka in the left back position?
Here's the thing. Whenever Saka moves out of the right wing, the team becomes completely imbalanced. We've seen it so many times where when you move Saka off the right, he becomes really imbalanced, especially if Odegaard is out and now you're playing ESR in that 10. The season kind of shifted when they moved ESR into the 10 and he moves into that right half channel because he combines then with Saka on the right. And that's really, really hard control for opposing defenses. So I think what's going to happen, and I think the Willian interview gave it away a little bit. It's going to be Willian left wing, ESR at the 10. You're going to have, I think, Saka at the right wing. Up front, probably Aubameyang, which is fine. He plays well up at the top of that. And I think you're going to see Suarez on the left side. I don't see that they're going away from Saka at the right wing. I understand left back obviously is a need, but Saka is such an important player for team balance on the right. When you have Bellerin and Pepe on the right, we've seen what happens. It becomes completely one-sided to the left, right? It's easy. It becomes really, really easy to stop, especially with no Luis to distribute the ball. And so that's not saying Pepe hasn't he's improved considerably with his positional awareness, but he's not Saka. So I would be surprised to see him back. I think it really limits his strengths. He's able to do it, which is a huge credit to his talent. But does it optimize him? Not really.
Yeah, I think the key to that is Odegaard maybe not being there. Because if you have Smith Rowe and you can put him out on the left, I think that makes it a little bit different having Saka in behind. But without that and having just so many pieces to shift around, it may be easier to just play something that we know with Cedric off of the left and left back and trying to make that work and keeping the front as dangerous as possible. And I agree with you that Pepe has really improved considerably. And, although I don't like the deal, I don't think anybody liked the deal. We all feel like we may have been, conned or duped or whatever, frauded. The player himself is really talented, and it's just unfortunate that he can't get into the side. But hopefully if things happen and we need a goal, Arteta will trust him enough to bring him out on the field, because I think that he's earned that. I think he's a good player, but just can't find a way to force his way in. And I mean, Saka is one of our best players, so it would be difficult for him to get a space, I think, Yeah,
so. It's just like I said, who do you play him for right now? Like the way Arteta, the way he runs the 4-2-3-1, he brings that left wing into that secondary 10 role, right? Whether it's William, whether it's ESR. Pepe can't really play that drift. Pepe can play the inside channel, but he can't play that secondary number 10. And so it makes sense to me why William will be playing. He's been playing, I mean, significant uptick in how well he's been playing. And he's certainly used to some of those pressure games too.
I forgot all about William, to be honest, before I saw the interview. I was like, oh yeah, he does still play for us, because he hasn't really been playing that much. I was like, I forgot about you. Like, I really, really did. But yeah, I mean, I'm not like, oh my gosh, William's going to play. It is what it is. I think we just need to get through this one and get out there and not let them score a goal. I think that's really, really important, not letting them get the away goal. But let's talk a little bit about just Tierney in general. Before the game against Liverpool, I was thinking to myself, I was like, do we really need to play him in this game? Like, has so many minutes in his legs from the games against in the international break for Scotland. And, do we need to play him? Like, I just thought, to myself, just, you just get like that gut feeling. And to see him go down was just like, it was just so heartbreaking, but you talked about before on the show about risk versus reward, and that he could have been fit to a certain extent and they decided to risk it because he's such an important player. Is this something that like Arsenal fans need to release from Arteta, this bashing him over the head with making these decisions because they're tough decisions to make, because if Tierney doesn't play and we lose that game, then maybe he gets blamed for not playing him, is that kind of what you think?
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, you see it all the time on social media where if a guy doesn't play, it's how come he didn't play him? If a guy plays, how come he played him, right? As a lot of this stuff are that like he gets the clearance from the sports science, from the medical staff, right? He gets the green light if they're available or not. If Tierney's not physically ready to go, they'll pull him. And we've seen that with Saka. We've seen it with ESR. We've seen it with other guys where they're just not unavailable because they're in that, what we call the physiological red zone. They're just too tired. And so, I mean, it just comes down to the player, the fitness level. I mean, Tierney has a really, really high fitness level. So does Xhaka. Like I had a video on Xhaka. He played 16 straight games. He played 65 straight games at one point for Arsenal. And so some of these guys are just very, very fit. Of course, Tierney plays at a different, acceleration level. But in this case, his injury, it's a contact injury. It's not like it's something maybe, I mean, let's say if it was a challenge where he's coming in and the player gets him and he doesn't get out of the way, it's one thing. This is literally where he's kicking through and his knee gets contacted, right? It could be the first game of the year where that happens. And what can you do about it? There's just not that much you can do about it.
That's important, I think, to know is that this is not an injury because of fatigue. This is an injury because of contact, which is completely different, which means it's something that you couldn't have anticipated. I mean, it's a contact sport, so you can't anticipate that, something like this can happen, but not to the extent of like, I shouldn't play him because Milner may sit on his knee or something like that.
Right.
So yeah, exactly. So yeah, I think that's really important for people to understand is that this is not based on fatigue and things like that, but just you want to let everybody know about the injury itself, the intricacies of the injury and what this means for his time out and things like that, his rehabilitation to get back into the side and the likelihood of him coming back before the season ends.
Sure. I think the first thing to understand, when I heard the news, I was actually happy to hear that news. I thought it was going to be, when I saw him go off the pitch and his knee shifted outwards, I know there's instability there. Then it becomes a matter of, is it a grade 2 or is it a grade 3? I'll never say that in public because I can't say it until we hear more news. But that's what I thought to myself. Okay, if this is a grade 3 LC, let's say the ligament on the outside or a lot of anatomy there. If it's a grade 3 injury and he needs surgery, he's out 3 or 4 months. And that also means his whole summer now is just spent on rehabbing and not being able to build any fitness. And so, which is not a good thing. So when you lose that long of a time span without playing, it's not easy to get back to that fitness level, which comes with a lot of other soft tissue injuries. We say that all the time, a lot of players, when they come back from a long-term injury, what happens? And so I was very, very happy that it was only a 4 to 6 week injury and very likely something on the outer part that they say ligament, there's multiple, that could be anything, but the real key thing is 4 to 6 week return timeline means he could be back latter stages of Europa with Tierney's previous fitness levels, with how disciplined he is and committed he is. I mean, it's possible he's really looking at that 4-week mark far more than he is the 6-week mark. And so the key question we'll see is how it evolves over time, of course. And so, but all in all, it was almost like a best case scenario based on what I saw happen.
Okay. So, well, I think ultimately we just have to pray for him and hope that he recovers as quickly as possible. And I'm sure this is really difficult on him. Like, it sucks for the fans, but it really sucks for him too. He's suffered a lot of injuries, and we just need to give him all our support and, just send good vibes out to him. But a question was raised in the chat earlier about whether or not we should have purchased or brought in Tierney in the first place, based on his injury record at Celtic and being a player that for certain people is considered injury prone. Is that a fair, argument that maybe we shouldn't have brought in Tierney based on his injury record? Or was there a way for us to bring him in and protect him a little bit more, knowing the type of player that he is and knowing that he's a little bit on the cusp of having a lot of injuries?
It's not fair to me. If you look at how many games he played for Celtic, I mean, it was ridiculous amount of games that he played. And yeah, he had that long-standing hernia issue. But the amount of games played, the injuries he's had, doesn't, to me, say he's injury prone. He's had the same injury with Celtic for a while that he dealt with. He played through it for them, which then, of course, leads to other issues. He had the shoulder issue, again, contact, right? The calf issue, when you're playing that many minutes, it's inherent you're going to have some soft tissue things, same as Saka, same as ESR. And these are still young guys. He's still developing physically into his prime to be able to meet the demands of the Premier League. And then now you have a contact injury. I think to me, when I look at his injury history record, I don't see injury prone, especially for how many minutes he's playing and the way he plays it at that intensity. Outside of that one long-standing injury with the hernia and the rest, it's been pretty clean, relatively clean for a player of his nature.
How do we protect him in the future? How do we make sure that he can play the way that he likes to play, which is at 100% at the type of intensity that he wants to play without, going through these periods of not having him? Because I just feel like, he's so integral to everything that we do. We create a lot of chances through him and off of that left-hand side in general. And I would rather see him play at 100%, at his most intense, even for less games, and maybe bring in somebody else that can fill in so that there's no pressure to play him even when he's maybe not 100%.
Yeah, I think you answered the question at the end. So you need some cover for him. I mean, the calf issue, that's the only issue I've seen with him during his time here, where he said, okay, maybe he needs some time off and he was pushed through a little bit. The shoulder, the knee injury, again, like we talked about, you can't do anything about that. So we certainly need some cover that is comfortable with to rotate him out of some of these games.
What is the level of cover for you, though? I think that's a conversation that we've been having. Are we looking for comparable to Tierney, or is it just okay for it to be somebody that can do a job? There's a big difference between the two.
Yeah, I mean, if it's someone comparable to Tierney, they're probably not going to be covered, right? I mean, he's one of the best left backs in the league, and so if you can find someone who's able to kind of do the job at 65 to 70% of Tierney, which is still pretty dang good, right? I think that's going to solve some big issues. But especially with a limited transfer budget, you're not going to find anyone at Tierney's level. And that brings me to the last point you were saying, don't bring Tierney in. If you look at the value on that deal, it's incredible for the player you got.
Mm-hmm. That's very true. And I was, I can't go back and say that we made a mistake. Looking back, I'm like looking at it, I'm like, it would have been better to have better cover for him so that if he wasn't 100%, we could maybe not feel like we need to risk it as much, because I think when you're looking at a Tierney at maybe 80%, 70, 80%, and you're looking at a Kolasinac, you're thinking, I'm gonna go Tierney, so maybe if we had something better there to protect him and things like that. But ultimately what he's added to the squad is invaluable, regardless to how little he's been able to play. And if we can just shift it, bring in good cover or somebody comparable to him in certain ways, we can fix this, because I still think he has a long career ahead of him for us.
I agree. And part of the thing we may not realize is Arteta's plan might have been to try to get, Maitland-Niles to play at left back a little bit, but he don't want to play as a fullback, right? So that might have been the original plan, because he played him a little bit in the restart on that left side, especially versus left footers to negate that cutback. And so that might have been the original plan. Obviously, the player has to agree to it. We don't know, right? So in their original calculus, it might have been, okay, hey, we do have some decent cover at left back. But once AMN decides, I want to play central midfield, even though I may not possess a lot of the features that you need from a central midfielder, but that is what it is. So.
Oh my gosh, you mean Maitland-Niles is not a real midfielder and it's not working? Yeah, I know. I've been watching him at West Brom, and it's a shocking loan to me. I'm just like, what is this? Like, I don't think you're a midfielder, but that's like a whole nother conversation. I hope that he's happy. That's crazy.
He switches off way too often. I love his demeanor. Like, it's great. He's so calm, but you see these plays where he just like switches off, and you're like, dude, what are you doing?
Exactly. Like, I look at Willock at Newcastle, and I'm like, he may not have been Arsenal level, but I see that he can play in the midfield. With Ainsley, I just think, like, you're right back. I just believe it in my soul that you're supposed to be somewhere on the wing. And it's almost like disappointing in a way, because I'm like, you could have been a starting right back for Arsenal, really, because we're potentially losing Hector. And if you ask me if I'd rather spend tons of money on somebody or just put Ainsley there, I would have probably said a couple months ago, just put Ainsley there. I think he's good enough, but I'm not sure.
And Arteta doesn't really play his backs like typical, just out on the width, backs. Like, you see Tierney coming, whether it's playing wide, they'll invert either of the side of the fullbacks as needed, right? And so there's a lot of positional versatility that comes into Arteta's game plan, right? I mean, it's almost kind of going after what Pep does with like Cancelo, kind of letting them really create that numbers advantage, right? But I think AMN, he was so set on that central role, he might have lost sight of the realities of it.
That's so funny, because you're not saying it like super rude, but just like the way you're like that role, like it's just hilarious, because I know what you're trying to say. Yeah, he was very set on that, and I don't know why, because he really shot he really made it impossible for him to make the Euro squad. Like, impossible. If he wanted to make it, he shouldn't have done what he did. I know this is like so off topic, but like, why did you do that? Like, because I think he may have had a chance if there was some more injuries or whatever in the England squad moving towards, the Euros, and he may have had a chance. But I think this is a decent enough segue into, you had kind of mentioned before that, and I'm not sure that a lot of fans are taking this into consideration, but the idea that Arteta is going to have this preseason that he hasn't had before, I think is a little bit of a myth because of the Euros, and the fact that
players you won't have it.
Right. So can you explain kind of like to the people that are watching, what the amount of these like international tournaments, how they're going to continue to make it difficult for teams to gain this type of consistency that they're probably looking for, because we have AFCON, we have the Euros, we have different things coming into play that even if we're not involved in European competition, there's still what may be some, inconsistencies for us moving forward anyway.
Yeah, I mean, there's really no time to train as a team. And that's usually what preseason is for, to really implement your principles. If you look at when Arteta came in, has he had, I mean, what's the most time they had? What was it between the restart and this season, which is like less than a month? During pandemic shutdown, like, yeah, he's doing over video and things of that nature with players, but there's no time to implement the principles you want. And so, and of course, like you said, with all these international tournaments, again, you have players all over the world doing their own thing, and then also they come in and they're more fatigued and schedules are congested. So then you're going to see even more inconsistency next season, not just from fatigue, but also, again, from these overuse injuries. So that throws another wrench into it. And then with that, you have a depleted transfer market with the COVID financials. So I don't think people realize just how, like, he's pretty much been coaching during the pandemic, and that's it essentially, right? And so for the most part, prior. And then so, like, these are unprecedented circumstances that he's been dealing with the entire time. And I don't think we're going to see a decrease in some of these things until next summer, when there's finally a true summer off. And these guys will have been playing essentially for 2 years straight.
Ooh, that sounds horrible. But I mean, that's why they get paid the big bucks, right? They're playing the sport. They love it. It's just they have to get through it until the next summer, that they can get that break that they really, really need. So, yeah, we've spoken about Tierney, about David Luiz, Ainsley Maitland-Niles, bunch of different things, but every little thing. And obviously you were the guest people wanted to see, so I'm glad you were able to come on. But give me a quick score prediction for the game tomorrow. What do you think? How do you think it's going to shape up against Slavia Prague? What is your prediction?
Oh, man, I hate predictions. It makes it harder for me to watch. I'm going to say, I know we're always prone for one error, so I'm going to say 2-1.
That's my prediction as well. I think we'll get 2 goals and we'll give up 1 and make it unbearably difficult, like, for the next leg, because they've scored an away goal, but we'll still get through. That's my anticipation. But, yeah, that's awesome. So do you have anything coming up, any videos or anything that people should be looking out for? And just let everybody know where they can find you.
Yeah, so I actually have recent Arsenal videos on Luiz and Tierney that dropped today. And of course, for social media, you can always find me at, the handle is 3CB, 3 Charlie Beta Performance. And so, drop me a line, and like we kind of did here, it's not just injury stuff, it's a lot of tactical stuff. That's fun. Coaching is my background too. So it just adds, it's another layer to talk about. And so I think it's a lot. I mean, it's going to be interesting, and especially interesting now when you have players missing and seeing the adjustments that will happen. And so, and then I think people will see how important Xhaka is tomorrow, man. The hate is ridiculous, but it is what it is.
It really is. I mean, I've softened my Xhaka stance this season because I get it, but if you didn't watch the Liverpool game, watch it again and realize how badly we needed that kid. We needed him and his left foot on that day, but thank you so much for being here, you guys. I don't even know when the next show is, I never know when the next show is. It'll probably be on Friday, post-match / preview for the Sheffield game. And if you guys like seeing Dr. Raj on the show, let me know, and I'll try to get him back on again, maybe for a tactics pod, maybe something like that. Let's do something different next time. But yeah, I'll see you guys on the next one. Make sure that you like and subscribe, and yeah, hopefully we win the game. Bye, guys.